At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law spat in my face and said, "Is this even food?" I just stood there. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't wipe it away right away. I simply looked at her and then quietly reached for a napkin. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story and tell me where you're watching from." I want to know how far this moment traveled, because that night, something in me changed in a way I never expected. I have always believed that Thanksgiving was sacred, not in a religious way, but in the quiet, human way. A day where no matter how complicated life became, we sat down together. We passed plates. We said thank you for the food, for the memories, for each other. For 42 years, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in that house. The same house my late husband, Walter, and I bought when our son was just 6 years old. Back then, the kitchen was too small, the oven unreliable, and the table barely fit 4 people. But we made it work. Every year, I cooked. Every year, we gathered. And every year, I believed it meant something. This year, I started preparing 3 days in advance. At 68, I don't move as quickly as I used to, but I still insisted on doing everything myself. The turkey, 18 pounds, had been thawing in the fridge since Monday. I seasoned it the way Walter liked: rosemary, garlic, butter under the skin. I woke up at 5 a.m. that morning just to get it in the oven on time. By 10 a.m., the house smelled like everything I remembered: stuffing with sage and celery, sweet potatoes with brown sugar and pecans, green bean casserole, my son's favorite since he was a boy, fresh cranberry sauce, slightly tart, just the way my granddaughter once said she loved. I even made the pumpkin pie from scratch, not because anyone asked me to, but because I still believed they would notice. By 3 p.m., everything was ready. The table was set with my best china, the one I only used twice a year. The silverware polished. The cloth napkins folded the way my mother taught me when I was a young bride. I placed a small candle at the center of the table. Just one. Walter used to say 1 candle was enough. "We don't need more light." He'd joke, "We already have you." I smiled at the memory as I lit it. Then I checked the time. 3:27 p.m. They said they'd be here at 3:30. At exactly 3:42, I heard the front door open. No knock. Just the sound of footsteps and voices spilling into the hallway. "Mom, we're here," my son called out casually, like he always did. I walked out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel, forcing a smile that came easier than I expected. "There you are," I said softly. He barely looked at me. Instead, he turned to help his wife take off her coat. Emily, my daughter-in-law of 11 years. She walked in like she always did, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, like she belonged in a magazine spread instead of my modest living room. Her eyes swept across the house briefly, not warmly, not appreciatively, just evaluating. "Smells strong," she said. "Not good, not delicious, just strong." I ignored it. I had learned to ignore a lot of things over the years. Dinner began 10 minutes later. We sat at the table, my son at the head, Emily beside him, my granddaughter Lily across from me, quietly scrolling on her phone. No one said grace. No one ever did anymore. I picked up the carving knife and began slicing the turkey carefully, the way Walter had taught me. Thin, even slices. Keep the juices in. Serve others first. "White or dark meat?" I asked Emily, my voice gentle. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, looking at her plate, then at the serving dishes spread across the table. Her nose wrinkled. Just a little. But enough. "I guess white," she said finally. I placed 2 slices on her plate, added a spoonful of stuffing, a scoop of green beans. I moved to my son next. Then Lily. Then myself. For a moment, there was silence. The kind that used to feel peaceful. Now it felt different. Emily picked up her fork. She poked at the stuffing first, then the turkey, then the sweet potatoes. Each movement slow, deliberate, like she was inspecting something, not eating it. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I said nothing. She brought a small bite to her mouth, chewed once, twice. Then suddenly, she dropped her fork onto the plate with a sharp clatter. "What is this?" she said. "No." One answered. My son didn't even look up. "I mean seriously," she continued, her voice louder now, sharper. "Is this even food?" My hand froze around my glass of water. Across from me, Lily stopped scrolling. But she didn't look at me. She looked at her mother. Waiting. I opened my mouth. Not to argue. Just to say something, anything. But before I could speak, Emily stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. And then, she did something I will never forget for as long as I live. She leaned forward and spat right across the table onto my face. The room went completely silent. I didn't move. Not right away. I felt it, warm, shocking, unreal, on my cheek, slowly sliding down. I could hear my own heartbeat. Loud, heavy, distant. I looked at my son, just for a second, waiting, hoping, praying for something. A word, a reaction, anything. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even look surprised. Emily laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Oh my God," she said, shaking her head. "I can't believe you expect us to eat this." And in that moment, standing there, in the dining room I had filled with love for over 4 decades, with the food I had spent days preparing, with the family I had given everything to, I realized something. This wasn't about the food. It never was. And as I finally lifted my napkin, slowly, carefully, wiping my face, I made a decision. Not in anger, not in pain, but in something much colder. I would not say a word. Not tonight. But what I would do next, they would remember for the rest of their lives. I didn't wipe my face right away. For a few seconds, I just stood there, holding the napkin in my hand, staring at the table I had set so carefully that morning. The candle was still burning. The turkey was still steaming. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Except nothing felt the same. I dabbed my cheek slowly. Not rushed. Not embarrassed. Just deliberate. Like I needed that small moment to understand what had just happened. No one spoke. Not my son. Not Emily. Not even Lily. The only sound in the room was the faint clink of a fork, as Emily casually picked it back up and nudged the food around on her plate. Again, like nothing had happened. "I think we should order takeout," she said, glancing at my son. Her tone was light, almost amused, like this was all just mildly inconvenient. My son let out a small breath. "Yeah," he said, "that might be better." Better. I repeated that word quietly in my mind. Better than what? Better than the meal I had been cooking since before sunrise? Better than the traditions I had held together, year after year, long after my husband was gone? I didn't ask. Instead, I sat down. Slowly, carefully. The chair felt colder than usual. Harder. Like it no longer belonged to me. Lily finally looked up from her phone. For a moment, our eyes met. I searched her face for something, anything. Confusion, discomfort, sympathy. But all I saw was hesitation. Then she looked away, back to her screen. Emily was already scrolling through her phone. "Thai or sushi?" she asked. My son shrugged. "Whatever you want." She smiled. That same effortless smile she always had. The one that never quite reached her eyes. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Neatly, the way I always did. Even now. Especially now. "I'll clear the table," I said. My voice sounded normal. Steady. Like it belonged to someone else. No one stopped me. No one said, "You don't have to." No one said, "Mom, sit down." They just let me stand up and begin carrying dishes back to the kitchen. One by one. The plates were still full, barely touched. The turkey I had basted every hour, now cooling under the dining room lights. The stuffing I had tasted twice to make sure it was just right, now pushed to the side like it was something unpleasant. I carried it all, quietly. In the kitchen, I set the plates down in the sink. The water wasn't running yet. I just stood there, looking at everything. At the food. At my hands. At the faint tremor in my fingers that I quickly stilled. From the dining room, I could hear them talking. Not about what had just happened. Not about me. But about delivery times. 45 minutes. Emily said, "That's too long." "Try the other place," my son replied. Their voices were casual. Normal. Untouched. I turned on the faucet. Warm water rushed into the sink, filling the silence I didn't want to hear anymore. I picked up a plate and began to rinse it. Slow circles. Careful movements. Just like always. But something felt different. Not outside. Inside. For years, I had told myself little things didn't matter. The comments. The looks. The way Emily would correct me in front of others. The way my son slowly stopped asking my opinion about anything. I told myself it was generational. That times had changed. That I needed to adapt. But this was not a small thing. I paused, my hands resting in the warm water. And suddenly, memories began to surface. Not loudly. Not all at once. But quietly, like pieces sliding into place. The Christmas 2 years ago, when Emily insisted they host instead of me. "You deserve a break," she had said. But when I arrived, everything had already been done. Decorated, cooked, arranged. There was no place for me, not even in the kitchen. The birthday dinner last spring, when she introduced me to her friends as his mom. Not by my name, not as family, just an accessory. The Sunday afternoons that slowly disappeared. The phone calls that became shorter, colder, less frequent. I had noticed. Of course I had noticed. But I had chosen not to see. Because seeing meant accepting. And accepting meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. That I was no longer part of my own family. The water kept running. The plate in my hands was already clean. But I didn't put it down. Not yet. From the other room, I heard Emily laugh again. Light, carefree, unbothered. And that was when something inside me finally settled. Not broke, not shattered, just settled. Into place. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and looked at my reflection in the small window above the sink. An older woman looked back at me, calm, composed, still. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt clear. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't about food. This wasn't even about disrespect. This was about position, control, and erasure. And I had just been shown exactly where I stood. I picked up the dish towel and folded it carefully, placed it back where it belonged. Everything in its place, just like always. But not everything would stay the same. In the dining room, I could hear the front door open briefly. A delivery. Fast. Efficient. Exactly what they wanted. I didn't go back to the table right away. Instead, I stood there for one more moment. In the quiet kitchen. In the house I had lived in for over 40 years. And I made a decision. A quiet one. The kind no one else could hear. If they believed I had no place here anymore, then I would stop fighting for one. And I would start deciding what happened next. I didn't return to the dining room immediately. I stayed in the kitchen, just long enough to hear everything without being seen. The soft rustle of plastic bags. The sound of containers opening. Chopsticks clicking together. Laughter. Finally, something edible, Emily said. Light. Casual. Almost playful. Like the last 15 minutes had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. I leaned one hand against the counter. Not for support. Just to feel something solid. Something that hadn't shifted. My son said something in response, but his voice was lower. I couldn't catch every word. I didn't need to. The tone was enough. Easy. Relaxed. Unaffected. I picked up the tray of cranberry sauce I had made that morning. The deep red still glossy under the kitchen light. I remembered tasting it. Adjusting the sugar. Thinking, Lily will like this one. I walked to the trash. Paused. Then set it down on the counter instead. Not everything had to be thrown away. Not tonight. When I finally stepped back into the dining room, no one looked up right away. The table had changed. My plates had been pushed aside, stacked carelessly near the edge. In their place, white takeout containers, soy sauce packets, napkins from a restaurant I had never been to. The candle was still there, still burning, but no one seemed to notice it anymore. I returned to my seat. The same chair, the same position, but it felt different now. Not colder this time, just distant. Emily glanced at me briefly. Oh, she said, like she had just remembered I existed. We got extra if you want. She nudged a container slightly in my direction. Didn't open it. Didn't look at me again. I nodded once. Thank you. My voice was quiet. Even. Controlled. I didn't reach for the food. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap. The same way I used to when I waited for everyone to be served. Across the table, Lily finally spoke. Grandma, you're not eating? Her voice was soft. Careful. Like she wasn't sure which version of the room she was supposed to respond to. I'm not hungry, I said. That was all. She nodded slowly, then went back to her food. I watched them for a moment. Not long. Just enough. The way Emily leaned into my son as she laughed. The way he smiled back without hesitation. The way Lily kept her eyes down, staying out of everything. It looked like a normal Thanksgiving dinner. From the outside. That was the strangest part. I reached forward and gently adjusted the candle. The flame flickered slightly, then steadied again. For a brief second, the light reflected in the glassware, in the silverware, in the untouched dishes I had prepared. And something about that reflection stayed with me. I think next year we should just host at our place, Emily said suddenly. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't hesitate. My son nodded almost immediately. Yeah, that makes sense. Less stress, she added. Less stress. I repeated the words silently. Not with hurt. Not with anger. Just noting them. Because now I understood. This wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about food or disrespect. It was about replacement. I had already been moved, shifted, quietly, gradually. Tonight was just the first time it was visible. I stood up again. This time, no one noticed. I walked to the sideboard where I kept the extra plates, opened the drawer, looked inside, then closed it. There was nothing I needed from there. Instead, I walked down the hallway, past the family photos lining the wall. Walter holding our son as a baby. Our first Christmas in this house. Lily as a toddler, sitting in my lap. I stopped for a second in front of one frame. A picture from years ago. All of us at this same table. Smiling. Close. Connected. I didn't touch it. I didn't take it down. I just looked. And then I kept walking. In my bedroom, the air felt different. Quieter. Still. I sat on the edge of the bed, folded my hands together, and let the silence settle around me. No tears came. They had already passed. Somewhere between the kitchen sink and the moment I saw the takeout on the table. What remained was something else. Clarity. I thought about the house, the paperwork, the accounts, the things Walter and I had built piece by piece over a lifetime. I thought about how easily I had let others move through it, change it, use it, without question. And for the first time, I asked myself a different question. Not why are they treating me this way, but why have I allowed it? The answer didn't come right away, but I didn't need it to, because something else had already taken its place. A decision. Not loud, not emotional, just final. From the dining room, I could still hear their voices. Faint now, distant. They sounded comfortable, at ease, like everything was exactly the way they wanted it. I leaned back slightly, looked around the room. At the dresser Walter built himself, at the curtains I had sewn by hand, at the life that had once been full, and I realized something that settled deep in my chest. They weren't trying to hurt me. Not really. They just didn't need me anymore. And that was something I could finally work with. I didn't go back to the dining room that night. Not after I sat on the edge of my bed and let everything settle into place. I stayed there long enough for the sounds of their laughter to fade into something distant, muffled, like it belonged to another house, another life. At some point, I heard chairs moving, footsteps, the low hum of conversation shifting toward the door. Text me when you get home, Emily said. Yeah, drive safe, my son added. Not a single knock on my bedroom door. Not a quiet, good night, Mom. Not even a pause. The front door opened, closed. And just like that, the house was mine again. I didn't move right away. I sat there for a few more seconds, listening to the silence return. It wasn't the same silence from before. This one felt clearer. When I finally stood up, I didn't rush. There was no reason to. No one waiting. No one watching. I walked back down the hallway. The same hallway lined with memories. But this time, I didn't stop at the photos. I already knew what they showed. The dining room looked exactly as they had left it. Takeout containers half open. Chopsticks resting across empty trays. Napkins crumpled. The candle had burned lower. The wax pooling at the base. My food was still there too. Untouched. Cold now. But intact. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at both versions of the same dinner. Side by side. What I had made. What they had chosen. I stepped forward and began clearing the table. Not quickly. Not angrily. Just methodically. I picked up the takeout containers first. Closed each one. Stacked them neatly. Set them aside. Then I turned to my dishes. The turkey. The stuffing. The sweet potatoes. I didn't throw them away. Not yet. Instead, I opened the refrigerator. Made space. Placed each dish inside carefully. Like they still mattered. Because they did. Just not to them. The sink was full now. Plates from 2 different meals. 2 different intentions. I rolled up my sleeves. Turned on the water. And began washing. 1 plate at a time. The rhythm came back quickly. Rinse. Soap. Scrub. Rinse again. Dry. I had done this thousands of times. After birthdays. After holidays. After ordinary dinners that once meant something. But tonight, each movement felt sharper. More defined. Like I was seeing everything for the first time. I picked up my son's plate. There was a single bite missing from the turkey. Just one. I looked at it for a second longer than necessary. Then washed it clean. Emily's plate had barely been touched. A smear of sweet potatoes pushed to the edge. Nothing else. I cleaned that one too. No hesitation. When I finished, I dried my hands and looked around the kitchen. Everything was back in order. Counters clean. Dishes put away. Leftovers stored. You wouldn't know what had happened if you walked in now. But I would. I turned off the light and stood there in the dim glow from the hallway. And that's when another memory surfaced. Not from tonight, not from last year, but from much earlier. Walter, standing in this same kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching me move around like I always did. "You don't have to do everything yourself," he had said once. I remember laughing. "Then who will?" I asked. He smiled. "You've trained them too well. They don't even know how to help anymore." At the time, it felt like a compliment. Now, it felt like a warning I had missed. I walked over to the small drawer near the fridge, opened it. Inside were years of small things. Rubber bands, old receipts, spare keys. I reached past all of it and pulled out a thin envelope, yellowed at the edges. I held it in my hands for a moment, felt the weight of it. Or maybe the lack of weight. I hadn't opened it in years. Didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. Walter's handwriting on the front. Simple, direct. My name. I ran my finger lightly over it, then set it down on the counter. Not yet. There was no urgency, no panic, no confusion, just timing. I turned and walked toward the living room. Sat down in my usual chair, the one by the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A few houses still had lights on. Faint signs of other families finishing their night. I wondered, briefly, what their dinners had looked like. If anyone else had sat at a table and felt invisible. Then I let the thought go. Because this wasn't about comparison. This was about clarity. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes for a second, and in that quiet, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Every decision in this house had slowly stopped including me. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently, until tonight, when it became undeniable. I opened my eyes, looked around the room, at the furniture, at the walls, at the life I had built, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to it. I felt like I was standing outside of it, observing, evaluating, and deciding, because if they believed this house, this life, was something they could step into and reshape without me, then they had misunderstood something very important. I reached for the envelope again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked it up, held it firmly, and whispered, almost to myself, "Let's see what you left me, Walter." Not with sadness, but with purpose. I didn't rush to open the envelope. I held it in my hands for a while, feeling the texture of the paper, the slight bend at the corner where it had been tucked away for years. Walter had given it to me a few months before he passed. "Just in case," he had said. I remember brushing it off at the time. We weren't the kind of couple who spoke in just in case. We spoke in routines, in habits, in quiet understandings that didn't need words. But now, I understood why he had insisted. I walked back into the kitchen, turned on the small light above the counter, placed the envelope down carefully, smoothing it flat with my palm. For a moment, I just looked at it, at my name written in his handwriting. Steady, familiar. Then I opened it. Inside, there was a single folded document and a short note. I picked up the note first. Of course I did. If you're reading this, it means something doesn't feel right. I paused, not because I was surprised, but because it felt precise, like he had seen something I hadn't. "I know you, Helen. You'll try to keep everything together, even when it's no longer yours to hold." I exhaled slowly, a quiet breath. "So I made a few decisions to make sure you're protected, even if you don't realize you need it yet." My fingers tightened slightly around the paper. Protected. I glanced down at the document in my other hand. Still folded. Still waiting. I set the note down gently, then opened the document. It was legal. Typed. Official. I didn't need to read every line to understand what I was looking at, but I did anyway. Slowly. Carefully. The house. The accounts. The investments. Everything was listed. And next to each item, a structure. Not ownership in the way I had assumed. Not shared. Not exposed. Protected. A trust. I read that word twice. Then a third time. A revocable living trust. Established years ago. Updated quietly. Without discussion. I kept reading. Primary beneficiary, me. Sole authority, me. Access restrictions, clearly defined. No automatic transfers. No joint claims. No external control without my consent. I felt something shift. Not emotionally. Structurally. Like a foundation I thought had cracked, revealing something stronger underneath. I turned the page. There was more. Conditions. Clauses. Safeguards. Walter hadn't just left things to me. He had made sure they couldn't be taken. Not easily. Not quietly. And then I saw something that made me stop. A clause regarding residency. Anyone living in the house. Required my written permission. I read it again. Slower this time. Required my written permission. I leaned back slightly against the counter. The words settling into place. Emily. My son. They had moved in 3 years ago. After needing more space. After wanting to be closer. At the time, it felt natural. Temporary. Helpful. I hadn't questioned it. I never asked for anything in writing. Because they were family. But this said something very different. I turned back to the note. There was one final line. Don't let comfort make you invisible. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not in grief. Not in regret. Just recognition. Walter had seen it. Maybe not clearly. Maybe not fully. But enough. Enough to leave me a choice. I folded the document back neatly. Placed it inside the envelope. But this time, I didn't put it away. I left it on the counter. In plain sight. Then I walked slowly through the house. Not as someone drifting through memories. But as someone reassessing space. The living room. Rearranged since they moved in. Subtle changes. Different cushions. Different colors. The hallway. A few of my frames replaced with newer ones. Photos I hadn't chosen. The guest room. Now Lily's room. Nothing drastic. Nothing obvious. But consistent. I stopped in the doorway. Looked at it for a moment. Then kept walking. Back to the kitchen. Back to the counter. Back to the envelope. I placed my hand on it again. Not lightly this time. Firm. And I understood something clearly. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about correction. A quiet, necessary correction. Because everything that had happened tonight, every word, every look, every moment of silence, had been built on one assumption. That I had nowhere else to stand. That I depended on them. That this house, this life, had already shifted out of my control. But they were wrong. They had just never been told. I turned off the kitchen light, picked up the envelope, and walked back toward my room. Not slowly this time. Deliberately. Because for the first time since dinner, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset. Not because I kept replaying what happened at the table. But because my mind was organizing. For years, I had been reacting. Adjusting. Making space. Explaining things away so they would make sense. But now, there was nothing left to explain. Only things to arrange. I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet. Exactly the way I preferred it. I made myself a cup of coffee. No rush. No noise. Just the soft sound of the kettle and the familiar weight of the mug in my hands. I didn't turn on the television. Didn't check my phone. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table. The same table from last night. Now clean. Empty. Neutral. I placed the envelope in front of me. Not hidden. Not protected. Visible. Then I reached for a notepad. The same one I used for grocery lists. Appointments. Small reminders. Today, it would be used differently. I wrote one word at the top of the page. Control. I looked at it for a moment. Then began listing. House. Accounts. Utilities. Insurance. Each item, one by one. No emotion attached. Just structure. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't assuming. I was confirming. After I finished my coffee, I stood up and walked to the small cabinet near the hallway. The one where I kept important documents. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside, everything was still there. Organized. Labeled. Of course it was. I had done it myself. I took out a folder. Then another. Then a third. Carried them back to the table. Sat down. And began going through each one. Property records. Bank statements. Insurance policies. Nothing had changed. Not legally. Everything still pointed to me. But something else had changed. Awareness. I turned a page. Then another. And then I noticed it. A secondary account. Not large. But consistent. Deposits. Withdrawals. Small movements. Regular. I stared at it for a second longer. I didn't recognize the pattern. Because I hadn't been looking. Until now. I reached for my phone. Scrolled through recent activity. There it was. Authorized access. Linked user. My son. I didn't react. I simply observed. The amounts weren't dramatic. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to feel like theft. Just enough to feel entitled. I set the phone down. Picked up my pen. And wrote one more word under the list. Access. That was the real issue. Not what they took. But what they assumed they could take. I closed the folder. Stacked everything neatly. Then I stood up and walked toward the hallway. I passed Lily's room. The door was slightly open. Inside, she was still asleep. Headphones on. Phone beside her. I watched her for a moment. She looked peaceful. Uninvolved. Not innocent, but unformed. I didn't step inside. This wasn't about her. Not yet. I continued, walking down to the living room. Sunlight had started to come through the window. Soft, quiet. I sat in my usual chair, the envelope still in my hand. And I thought about timing. Not urgency, not reaction. Timing. Because what I did next couldn't be emotional. It had to be precise, measured, irreversible. I stood up again, walked back to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice. Good morning, Helen. His voice hadn't changed. Steady, professional. Good morning, Richard, I said. My voice matched his. No hesitation, no softness. I'd like to schedule a meeting, I continued. A brief pause. Of course. Is everything all right? I looked around the kitchen, at the clean counters, at the quiet space, at the life that still belonged to me. Yes, I said, then added, just slightly slower. But I think it's time we review everything. Another pause. Shorter this time. I understand, he replied. We set a time. Later that afternoon. I ended the call, set the phone down, and exhaled once. Not deeply, not dramatically, just enough. Because the next steps had already begun. Not with confrontation, not with arguments, but with something far more effective. Structure. I picked up the notepad again, looked at the list, then added one final word at the bottom. Permission. And this time, I underlined it. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I was anxious, just precise. Richard's office hadn't changed. Same building, same quiet hallway, same faint scent of polished wood and old paper. I had been here before, years ago, when Walter insisted we put things in order. Back then, I sat beside him, listened more than I spoke, trusted more than I questioned. Today, I walked in alone. Good to see you, Helen, Richard said, standing as I entered. He didn't look surprised. Not really. You too, I replied. We shook hands. Firm, professional, no small talk. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I sat down, placed the envelope in front of me. I reviewed the trust documents this morning, I said. Straight to it. He nodded once. I assumed you might. I slid the envelope slightly forward, not offering it, just placing it between us. I want to understand something clearly, I continued. Nothing in this structure allows access without my consent. Is that correct? It is. Correct, he said. No hesitation. I watched his face, looking for uncertainty. There was none. Even for immediate family? I asked. Especially for immediate family, he replied. I let that settle. Not because I doubted him, but because I wanted to hear it exactly like that. Especially. I nodded once, then reached into my bag and pulled out a printed statement. The account activity from that morning. I placed it next to the envelope. This account, I said. There's a secondary access linked to my son. Richard glanced down, read quickly, then leaned back slightly in his chair. Authorized user, he said. Not an owner. But yes, he has access. Had, I corrected. He looked up at me. Not surprised. Just attentive. I want that access removed, I said. Of course, he replied. No questions. No hesitation. Just a simple acknowledgement. And I want confirmation, I added. In writing. You'll have it today. I nodded again. Then I leaned back in my chair. Not far. Just enough to shift the weight of the conversation. There's something else, I said. He waited. Didn't interrupt. The house, I continued. Residency clauses. I want them enforced. A brief pause. Not confusion. Consideration. They're already enforceable, he said carefully. But if you're asking to formalize occupancy terms, I am, I said. Clear. Direct. He nodded slowly. We can draft a notice, he said. Define terms of continued residence. Duration. Conditions. Or termination. Termination. The word didn't feel heavy. Just accurate. I'd like both options prepared, I said. He studied me for a second. Not judging. Just measuring. Understood. I reached for the envelope. Opened it again. Took out the document. I didn't read this as a warning before, I said quietly. Richard didn't respond. He didn't need to. I read it as preparation, I added. He gave a small nod. That's what it was meant to be. I folded the paper again. Placed it back inside. I won't act emotionally, I said. I didn't expect you would. That almost made me smile. Almost. I want everything aligned before I say anything. I continued. No gaps. No assumptions. That's the right approach, he said. I stood up. Slowly. The meeting was over. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been set in motion. Richard stood as well. I'll have the documents ready by tomorrow morning, he said. That's fine, I replied. Then I paused, just for a second. And Richard? Yes. If they ask you anything, they won't get anything, he said. No hesitation. Everything goes through you. I nodded once. Good. I picked up my bag, turned, and walked out. The hallway felt quieter on the way out. Or maybe I was just hearing it differently. Outside, the air was cooler, crisp, clean. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even confrontation. It was structure. And structure doesn't need to raise its voice. I got into my car, closed the door. For a second, I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel. Then I looked straight ahead and thought about dinner. Not last night. The next one. Because the next time we sat at that table, nothing would be unclear anymore. Not the roles. Not the boundaries. Not who was allowed to be there. I started the engine and drove home, not to react, but to prepare the moment they wouldn't be expecting. I didn't go straight back inside when I got home. I sat in the car for a moment, engine off, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The house looked the same from the outside. Quiet. Still. Like nothing had shifted. But I knew better now. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and walked up the front path. No rush. No hesitation. Inside, the house greeted me the same way it always had. Familiar. Comfortable. But something was different. Not in the furniture. Not in the walls. In me. I set my bag down by the door. Placed my keys in the same small bowl I had used for years. Everything in its place. Then I walked into the kitchen. The space was clean. Exactly how I had left it. The refrigerator hummed softly. The counters were clear. The air still held a faint trace of last night's cooking. I moved through it slowly. Not inspecting. Just observing. Then I opened the refrigerator. The dishes were still there. Stacked neatly. Covered. I took out the turkey first. Set it on the counter. Then the stuffing. The sweet potatoes. The cranberry sauce. One by one, I lined them up. Just like I had before dinner. For a moment, I stood there, looking at them. Not with disappointment. Not with sadness. Just with recognition. This had been my offering. And now, it had a different purpose. I reached for a container. Opened it. Carefully transferred a portion of the turkey inside. Then the sides. Not everything. Just enough. I sealed it. Set it aside. Then I repeated the process. Another container. Another portion. Methodical. Measured. I wasn't saving dinner. I was redistributing it. When I finished, I had 3 containers lined up on the counter. I wiped my hands. Looked at them. Then picked up my phone. There was a number I hadn't called in a while. Mrs. Alvarez. My neighbor. 2 houses down. She answered on the second ring. Helen. Her voice was warm. Surprised. Hi, Maria, I said. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all. Everything okay? I glanced at the containers. I made too much food yesterday, I said. I was wondering if you'd like some. A pause. Then, oh, that's very kind. You didn't have to. I know, I said gently. But I'd like to. Another pause. Softer this time. Then yes, she said. I'd love that. I'll bring it over in a few minutes. I ended the call, picked up the containers, and walked out the front door. The air was cooler now. The street quiet. I walked slowly, not because I needed to, but because I was aware of each step, of each decision. When Maria opened the door, her smile was immediate. Genuine. Oh, Helen, she said. You're always thinking of others. I handed her the containers. It's nothing, I replied. But we both knew that wasn't true. Come in for a minute, she asked. I considered it, just for a second, then shook my head. Another time, I said. I have a few things to take care of today. She nodded, understanding without needing explanation. Thank you, she said again. I smiled, then turned back toward my house. As I walked, I felt something shift again. Not heavy, not dramatic, just alignment. Back inside, the kitchen felt different. Lighter, not because the food was gone, but because I had chosen where it went. I cleaned the remaining dishes, stored what was left. Then I dried my hands and went to the living room. I didn't sit down this time. Instead, I walked to the small cabinet near the window, opened it. Inside were spare keys, old duplicates. I took them out, counted them. 1, 2, 3. I knew exactly who had each one. I placed them on the table, lined them up. Then I reached for my phone again. Another call. This one shorter, more direct. Hi. I'd like to schedule a lock change, I said. A pause. Then yes. Today, if possible. I gave the address. Confirmed the time. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just execution. I looked at the keys on the table. They had never asked for them. I had offered. Freely. Because that's what family does. Or at least what I believed it did. I picked up the keys. Closed my hand around them. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was taking something away. I felt like I was putting something back. In place. Where it should have always been. Control. By the time the locksmith arrived, the house was quiet again. Just the way I needed it. Not empty. Defined. The locksmith arrived exactly at 2:15 p.m. Right on time. I opened the door before he even had a chance to knock. Afternoon, he said, glancing at his clipboard. You called about a lock change? Yes, I replied. Steady. Simple. He stepped inside, took a quick look around. Professional eyes. Not curious. Just assessing. Front door and back? He asked. All exterior doors, I said. He nodded once. Won't take long. I stepped aside, letting him pass. The sound of tools filled the hallway. Metal against metal. Measured. Precise. I stood in the living room, not watching him directly, but aware of every movement. Each click. Each turn. Each small adjustment. It didn't feel disruptive. It felt corrective. Like something that should have been done a long time ago. About 20 minutes later, he returned. Finished. All set, he said, holding out a small set of new keys. I took them. Felt the weight in my hand. Solid. Final. Old ones won't work anymore, he added. I understand, I said. He gave a polite nod, packed up his tools, and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood there for a moment, holding the new keys. Then I walked to the table, placed them down exactly where the old ones had been. 3 keys. New. Identical. No duplicates. I didn't hide them. I didn't lock them away. I left them in plain sight. Because this wasn't about secrecy. It was about clarity. Around 5:40 p.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. Right on schedule. I didn't move immediately. I stayed in my chair, hands resting calmly in my lap. The front door handle turned. Once. Then again. A pause. Then a third time. Longer this time. More force. The sound of confusion came next. Mom, my son's voice called from outside. I stood up. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just deliberately. I walked to the door. Unlocked it. Opened it. They stood there. Both of them. Emily's expression was the first thing I noticed. Tight. Irritated. What happened to the lock? She asked immediately. It's been changed, I said. No explanation. No apology. My son frowned slightly. Why? I stepped back, opening the door just enough for them to enter. For security, I said. They walked in. Slowly. Emily glanced around. Like something inside the house might have shifted without her permission. It was fine before, she said. It is fine now, I replied. She didn't like that answer. I could see it. My son stepped closer, lowered his voice slightly. Mom, you could have told us. I looked at him. Not long. Just enough. I'm telling you now, I said. Silence. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present. Emily let out a small breath. Crossed her arms. So what? We don't get keys anymore, she asked. I walked past them. Back toward the living room. The locks belong to the house, I said calmly. And the house belongs to me. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't emphasize the words. But they landed. I could feel it behind me. A shift. Subtle. But real. My son followed. Slower this time. Mom, no one is trying to take anything from you, he said. I turned to face him. I know, I replied. And that was the truth. They weren't trying. They already had been. Emily stepped into the room. Her tone sharper now. This feels unnecessary, she said. I nodded slightly. It might, I said. Then I sat down. Calm. Composed. But it isn't. Another silence. Different this time. Less comfortable. My son looked at the table. At the keys. Then back at me. What is this about? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the envelope beside me. Placed my hand on it. Not opening it. Not yet. This, I said quietly, is about making sure everything is clear. Emily's eyes moved to the envelope. What's that? She asked. I looked at her. Steady. Something I should have reviewed a long time ago. She didn't like that answer either. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then my son sighed. Mom, if this is about last night, it's not, I said. And that was true. Last night wasn't the cause. It was the confirmation. I leaned back slightly in my chair. This is about structure, I continued, and making sure it's respected. Emily let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Structure? She repeated. I didn't respond to the tone. Yes, I said simply. Another pause. They were waiting for more. For an explanation. A reaction. An emotion. But I gave them none. Because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a transition. And they could feel it. Even if they didn't understand it yet. I picked up the keys from the table. Held them for a moment. Then set them back down. There will be some changes, I said. Calm. Measured. Final. And this time, I didn't explain what those changes were. Not yet. Because for the first time, they were the ones waiting. I didn't go back to the living room after that. I didn't need to. Their silence followed me down the hallway anyway. Not loud. Not dramatic. But present. I stepped into my bedroom and closed the door gently behind me. Not to shut them out. Just to create space. For a moment, I stood there, looking at the room. The same room I had walked into the night before. But it didn't feel the same. Last night, I had come here to understand. Tonight, I already did. I sat down at the small desk near the window, opened the drawer, took out a pen. Then I pulled a blank sheet of paper toward me. Not the notepad from this morning. Not the list. Something cleaner. More deliberate. I didn't start writing immediately. Instead, I listened. From the living room, their voices had returned. Lower now. More controlled. She can't be serious, Emily whispered. I don't know, my son replied. I've never seen her like this. Like this. I paused for a second. Not offended. Just noting it. Because this wasn't new. It was simply visible now. I lowered my pen to the paper and began writing. Not a letter. Not an explanation. A structure. Notice of residency terms. The words came easily. Not because I had rehearsed them, but because they were already clear. I wrote slowly. Carefully. Each sentence measured. Occupancy by permission. Defined duration. Respect of property. Financial boundaries. No emotion. No history. Just terms. I didn't mention last night. Didn't mention the table. Didn't mention the moment that changed everything. Because this wasn't about a moment. It was about a pattern. And patterns don't need to be explained. They need to be addressed. I paused halfway through. Set the pen down. Then reached for the envelope again. Opened it. Looked at the document inside. Not to reread it. Just to confirm. Everything I was writing was already supported. I wasn't creating anything new. I was enforcing what had always been there. I closed the envelope. Set it beside me. And continued writing. Outside the room, I could hear movement. Footsteps. Then a knock. Light. Controlled. Mom, my son's voice. I didn't answer immediately. Not to ignore him. Just to finish the sentence I was writing. When I was done, I placed the pen down. Come in, I said. The door opened slowly. He stepped inside. Alone. Emily didn't follow. He closed the door behind him. Not fully. Just enough. His posture was different. Less certain. We should talk, he said. I nodded slightly. We are, I replied. He glanced at the paper on the desk. What is that, he asked. A draft, I said. Of what? Terms. He exhaled. Looked away for a moment. This doesn't feel like you, he said. I studied him. It had been a long time since he had looked at me this closely. Then you haven't been paying attention, I said. Not harsh. Not cold. Just honest. That landed. He shifted his weight again. Mom, we didn't mean to upset you, he said. I nodded once. I know, I replied. And again, that was true. But that doesn't change anything, I added. He frowned slightly. It should, he said. I shook my head. No, I said. Intent doesn't replace impact. Silence. He didn't argue. Because he couldn't. I turned the paper slightly. Let him see the heading. Notice of residency terms. He read it. Slowly. Then looked back at me. You're serious, he said. Yes. No hesitation. He ran a hand over his face. Emily's not going to take this well, he said. I held his gaze. This isn't about Emily, I said. That wasn't entirely true. But it was enough. He nodded slowly. And me? He asked. There it was. The question underneath everything else. I leaned back slightly. This is about anyone who lives in this house, I said. Careful. Neutral. Defined. He looked at the paper again. Then at the room. Then back at me. I didn't think it would come to this, he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. Because neither had I. But that didn't matter anymore. I did, I said finally. Not because I had predicted it. But because now, I understood it. He stood there for a moment longer, then nodded. Once. Okay, he said. Not agreement. Not acceptance. Just acknowledgement. He turned, opened the door, paused for a second, then walked out. I didn't call him back. I didn't explain further. I simply turned back to the desk, picked up my pen, and continued writing. Because this part didn't require discussion anymore, only completion, I finished writing just before sunset. The light from the window had shifted softer now, stretching across the desk in long, quiet lines. I placed the pen down, read the document once, then again. No changes, no adjustments. It said exactly what it needed to say. I stood up, picked up the paper, and walked back toward the living room. They were both there. My son stood near the window, arms crossed, thinking. Emily was on the couch, phone in her hand, but not scrolling. They both looked up when I entered. I didn't speak right away. I walked to the table, placed the paper down, flat, centered. This is the notice, I said. No explanation, no introduction, just the truth. My son stepped forward first, picked it up. Emily didn't move, but her eyes followed every line he read. The room stayed quiet, not tense, just focused. He read slowly, more carefully than I expected. Then he handed it to her. She took it, looked at the top line, then down the page. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. This is legal? She asked. Yes, I said. She looked at me, searching for something. Emotion, weakness, hesitation. There was none. You're giving us 30 days? She said. I'm giving you time, I replied. She let out a small breath. Not a laugh this time. Something else. My son didn't speak. He was still looking at the paper, processing, accepting, or maybe just realizing. I'll help you find a place, I said. Both of them looked up at that, not expecting it. I'm not asking you to struggle, I continued. I'm asking you to transition. My voice stayed even, because this wasn't punishment. It was direction. Emily folded the paper. Not neatly, but not carelessly either. And if we don't agree? She asked. I met her eyes. This isn't an agreement, I said. Silence. Clear. Final. My son closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. Okay, he said quietly, just like before. But this time, there was more in it. Understanding. Not of everything, but enough. Emily didn't respond. She just sat there, holding the paper. And for the first time since I had known her, she didn't have anything to say. I turned away, not because I was finished, but because there was nothing left to add. I walked back toward the kitchen. The same path, the same space, but everything felt settled, not empty, defined. I poured myself a glass of water, took a small sip. Behind me, I could hear movement. Not loud, not rushed, just different. Drawers opening, soft footsteps, quiet voices. I didn't listen closely. I didn't need to, because whatever they were saying now didn't change what had already been said. I walked to the window, looked outside. The sky had turned a soft shade of gray-blue, evening settling in. For a moment, I just stood there, not thinking, not remembering, just being. Then I felt it. Not relief, not satisfaction, something quieter. Balance. I thought about last night. The table, the candle, the moment everything shifted. And I realized something. That moment didn't break me. It revealed me. Revealed what I had been avoiding, what I had been allowing, and what I was finally willing to change. I set the glass down, turned off the kitchen light. The house dimmed slightly, but it didn't feel dark. It felt calm. I walked back through the living room. They were still there, quieter now, closer together, planning, adjusting, just like I had. I didn't interrupt. I simply walked past, down the hallway, into my room. And this time, when I closed the door, it didn't feel like I was shutting anything out. It felt like I was finally keeping something in. My space, my name, my place. And as I sat down in the quiet, I didn't think about what I had taken back, only what I had finally stopped giving away. The next Thanksgiving, the table would still be set, the candle would still be lit, but this time, only those who respected the seat would be invited to sit at it.